I hope you're well. We'll just, I think we'll just wait 30 seconds just to make sure we've got everyone in. Is it looking like most people are in, Helen, or have you still got people arriving?
Probably good to go now.
Okay, great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming this afternoon. My name, for those of you who I haven't met or haven't seen my face around, Andy Kaifong, Secondary Principal. Really appreciate you making the time available this afternoon, Nikki. Nice to see you back. I'll let Helen and Matt introduce themselves to you, and then we'll get underway. So, Helen, would you like to kick off?
Yep, I'm Helen Herford. I'm an assistant principal here at WSO. I'll be your go-to SLT link for year 11. And Matt?
Hi, I'm Matthew James, and same as Helen, I'm an assistant principal. However, one of my responsibilities is year 10.
Great. Now, so there's the three of us this afternoon. Just to let you know, the session is being recorded and will be shared afterwards. So as long as everyone's aware of that, feel free, if you would prefer your cameras on or off, that's completely up to you. But it is being recorded and will be shared afterwards. And just by way of process this afternoon for the next 50 or so minutes, if you could pop your questions into the chat room and address them to everyone, Matt and Helen will do their best to respond in text by responding to those questions. So if everyone sees them, hopefully there'll be minimal repeating. And then if there are things in there that need a response from me, then we'll highlight those and I can respond to those. Or if there are things from the floor, we can deal with those as well. So I'm just looking through the couple of pages. We had one for year 7, a Zoom yesterday for year 7, and one for years 8 and 9 yesterday. Had about 60 or 70 parents or families in those. It looks like we've got about a similar number for this afternoon. So really do appreciate you coming. I know there are some repeat people in the session, so I'm hoping that what you hear today is the same as what you heard yesterday, otherwise we've got a problem. So look, based on all the responses that you sent in originally, it makes sense that I run through the programs for years 10 and 11, and they are slightly different. So I'll go through those separately. If you've only got a year 10 parent, then obviously some of that will be relevant, some of it will be less relevant, and likewise if you've got year 11. So I apologise for that. But the health and safety material that we will go through will be relevant for everyone. Those are obviously the two biggest concerns that people have. I'll talk a little bit about siblings, and I'll talk a little bit about the 100% remote option also. So we'll start. Obviously, we have taken the learning from the remote learning period in 16 weeks at the end of last year and taken all our learnings from that, which were well endorsed by the KHDA. And we are dealing with a different set of plans. So fair to say that having a mixture of face-to-face on-site learning and remote learning at home is tricky to balance. Our commitment to you comes in two forms really, and it's the same as what we had in the remote learning phase at the end of last year. As a school, what we're trying to do is make sure that we retain a full and broad offering for every year level. So all the decisions that we're making are based around that as a full offering. And obviously the second or however which order they come in, the health and safety requirements that have been set down by the KHDA are something that those are non-negotiable. And as parents, I'm sure you're really keen to hear what those are if you didn't hear them yesterday, and what that looks like for your children. So those are the two really underpinning factors of our decision making here. The one thing I will say to you at the moment, because we're going to talk about two different models of learning for year 10 and 11, is that we do see that the experience between face-to-face in-school learning and remote learning at home, they are slightly different experiences, but as I said to the groups yesterday, we see them as being equally valuable. So that's what enables us to have a mixture of on-site learning and remote learning, but also feel like we are getting good value for money for your children. For those of you who have got maybe older children at the moment, the GCSE results have just come out today. There will have been enormous anxiety about those. It was during the term and going into those. GCSE results, the way that they've come out, are an amazing set of results from that cohort. So to a degree, there's some endorsement of the online learning that did happen at the end of last year. So a continuation of that is positive for you as parents, I believe. So let's just start with the learning models, what this actually looks like. So when I talk about 50-50 or when I talk about 80-20, what does that actually look like? And I know that some of you are returning, so I apologise if some of this information is repeated to you, but you'll also understand that if you were in the 8-9 session yesterday who are on a 50-50 model, then the year 10 model is exactly the same. It is a 50-50 model. So let's start there. Effectively what happens is that due to restrictions around numbers of students in classrooms, the numbers of classrooms that we've got on site, we've decided that year 10 and year 12 will have a 50-50 program. So by that I mean that over the period of a fortnight or 2 weeks, they will be in school 50% of the time and they will be remote learning from home 50% of the time. Okay, so across a 2-week period, that means that as a year 10 parent, your children could come to school on a Sunday, a Tuesday and Thursday for week 1. And then in week 2, they would attend school on the Monday and the Wednesday. So across a 2-week period, they would do 5 days of in-school, and of course the other 5 days they would be remote learning from home. Now, what that means is, so for you parents of year 10, is if you're on those days, the whole year level is in for that day. So and that's why we need the space that we need. So what we've got is a little complex puzzle to solve, because of course we've got a mixture of students who are making different choices. So we've got students who have decided that they will do the 50-50 model. So of course they will come to school on 3 days 1 week and 2 days the next. We've also got some families who have chosen 100% remote learning. They will of course stay at home 100% of the time. And I'll come back to you. If some of you are sitting in the audience now, I'll come back to you in a minute. And then we've got some families who are unsure. They might have chosen 100% remote learning, but they're kind of thinking, if I change my mind in 2 weeks, can I send my children to school? Or the flip side of that is, if I start my children at school and don't like it, or I don't feel safe with it, can I take them into 100% remote learning? So on that choice, I'm going to say to you that the choice completely remains with you on any given day or week. Okay, so if you're sitting in the audience now and you've said, yes, I'm happy to send my children back to school, and they'll do the program as I've described it, then I'm hoping that you'll be happy and you'll feel safe and that will carry on. But look, I'm realistic enough to know that some of you who are sitting in there at the moment will go, I'm happy to have a go. After a week or 2 weeks, what I might find is, I'm not that happy with what's happening at school for whatever reason. It might be health and safety, or I feel uneasy. So I'm going to actually take my son or daughter and go 100% remote. All we would need is a little communication from you, and we can make that change. So what we're doing at the moment is that we are planning on these models. So for year 10, the 50-50 model, we are planning for all students. The numbers in the classes on the days that they're in will be reduced by those of you who decide to do 100% remote. They'll be reduced by students who are sick on any given day, or by some families who are maybe picking and choosing on a given day. I'm hoping that that third option won't happen too much. So I think if I can make a recommendation to you, it should be make a decision about whether you buy into the 50-50 model or whether you're going to go 100% remote. And stick with that for a period of time, but because what we do know is that your children have been out of school for 6 months at least. They're going to come back to something that is unusual and different again. What we do know is one of the biggest things they want us to do was see their friends. So that's a big plus for coming to school. But if the health and safety things are a bit of a concern, obviously you always have the choice to remove them and go 100% remote. We will cope, our systems and our rooming and our staffing will cope with all of year 10s doing the 50-50 model, or 50% of the year 10s doing the 50-50 model, if that makes sense. All right, so Nikki, can I just pick up your point yesterday? So Nikki was in the year 8 and 9 conversation yesterday, and what we've done with the 8s and 9s and 10s and 12s is exactly the same. They will alternate days across a 2-week period. Yesterday in a conversation with Nikki, she raised the point that would there be a consideration for a week on and week off option? And I think the main concern was cross-contamination and health and safety. Nikki, is that fair?
Yes, it is. It's I understand that a full week at school for students wearing a mask might be slightly more challenging, and perhaps the one day on, one day at home would be easier for that. But my concern was just if you're putting children into bubbles, in my opinion, wouldn't it be better to keep them in school for that full week in that bubble? And then obviously you'd have your normal cleanliness, your cleaning, but then a really deep clean on the weekend, then for a fresh group of children. But yes, I mean, if it can be a consideration like we spoke about yesterday, I feel it's something perhaps maybe we can talk about.
Okay, so Nikki, yesterday, and just to all of you, I made a commitment to the year 8 and 9 parents yesterday that I would basically send out a survey and we would go with the majority option. However, since then I've made some inquiries with the KHDA and GEMS, and the 1 week on, 1 week off is not an acceptable model.
Okay.
So, Nikki, I'm sorry, I did ask and I was really committed to that conversation. So we are going to go with the day on, with the alternate days. Now, when I come to the health and safety, Nikki, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening in that space between blocks and at the ends of each day, because that's the best reassurance I can give you in that regard at the moment. So that's the year 10s, and obviously we've got I don't think we've got any year 12 parents in the room at the moment. The year 11s are a different model. Now, the reason that the year 11s are a different model is that when we thought about our capacity and what we're trying to do, our year 11s are really, well, obviously all really important year levels to us, but these children have now done a term at home remote. They face this term also, and possibly a whole year of this. I'm going to call it a disrupted model because that's the best way to describe it. So we really felt that we wanted to give them as much in-school time as we could, just to support them and their families. We've done the same with year 13. Those are our 2 exam year levels. So in the original plan we put to the KHDA, we wanted to have our year 11 students in 100% of the time. KHDA reviewed our plan and told us that we cannot have any single year level in 100% of the time, and that every year level must have at least 20% remote learning. So that's why our model for year 11 currently sits at 80-20. Now, there are some of you who will be sitting in the audience at the moment who will be going, hang on, I know some friends of children, friends around that are going to other schools that are back 100% of the time. I have not looked into those models and I cannot comment. The only thing that I have heard is that sometimes they might be doing every day, but they're not doing all day, or other configurations of 100%. So what we're saying is we're offering our full program to your children every day. Sometimes they're in school and sometimes they're not at school. So for year 11s, 80-20 means that roughly your children will attend school 4 days out of 5. And so we will roster home a group of students in each class, probably roughly 20% of the class on Mondays, another 20 Tuesday. So what that does is it meets the 80-20 rule, it also allows us generally to fit the remaining students into one classroom. Okay, so that's how that works for them. So, and that day will stay the same for 2 or 3 weeks, and then we'll review that and probably change the roster. Because of course you're thinking, if my child always misses a Friday, they're always going to miss the same set of classes. Okay, so if we rotate the day, then it sort of evens out over time the impact of being on site or remote learning, for example. The biggest impact, if I'm honest, around that will be practical classes. But I know that some of our HODs are already thinking about how they'll deal with practical and how they'll deal with not 100% of their kids in all the time. So that's how that works at the moment for Year 11. Matt and Helen, are there any questions that are surfacing around either of those models that need to have some input from me at this stage, do you think? Or do you think you're managing to answer them?
I just find in the unmute. And a few questions privately, but I think everything else is being covered currently.
Oh.
Okay. Helen?
No, there's been one on health and safety, but not so much what you've talked about so far.
But we'll come to the health and safety bit next. All right, so I'll carry on. Thank you. Just keep your questions going into everyone on the chat room. Thanks, folks. In terms of the platform that we're using, we had leading into remote learning in March of this year. WSO fantastically placed by the work that had been done, obviously prior to me, in terms of technology integration and utilisation by staff. So the level of expertise from staff with the Microsoft Teams platform and additionally OneNote was at a really good level. The familiarisation of your children with the Microsoft Teams platform was generally at an acceptable level. And I'd like to think that over those 16 weeks that has grown, both for your children and for staff. So how do we manage this 80 or some students in and some students out of class? So what the expectation is at the moment is that Microsoft Teams and OneNote will still be the platform by which we deliver lessons. So if you recall back to the last year, if you sat alongside your children, you would have seen the Teams platform, you would have seen the way that channels are used, the way that assignments are uploaded, the way that feedback is given, etc., etc. That doesn't change. So what happens is let's just say if Matt's teaching a class of Year 10 English, he will be planning and delivering using the Microsoft Teams platform. He might have 4/5 of his Year 10 class in front of him, and the other 1/5 will be at home accessing the lesson as you're used to. Probably the slightly more unusual experience is that the children in the class will be seeing Matt face-to-face in the same room, but for part of that lesson, they may also be interacting through the Teams platform. The reason for that is that's the best way that we can keep the value of the on-site learning and the off-site learning the same. Slightly different experience, as I said, but actually the value to those children is the same. The material is the same, the interaction with the material is the same. If your child is at home, he or she can interact with Matt as the teacher. Matt will be wearing a Bluetooth microphone, so he will be able to hear any questions that come from your child at home. The rest of the class may also be able to hear those questions. Matt will be able to respond to those questions, and that will be heard by everyone. So as best we can using the technology, we can replicate the in-class experience at home. So that's a massive plus, because in all of this, anything new that we need to learn on that scale is very challenging. All of our staff are better at using Teams now than they were in March. As I said, I suspect most of our students, if not all of our students, are also more familiar with Teams. And I suspect many of you are more familiar with Teams than you were in March last year also. So that's a big plus for us. We go on from there. So that's, in a nutshell, that's how the learning works. So the ratio is 10 for Year 10, 50-50, alternate days. For Year 11, 80-20, you'll be rostered at home for a day to start with. Okay, so if I move on to the health and safety, because that relates to the model. In a normal circumstance, your children walk to school and they travel from third floor, phase 3 to first floor, phase 4, etc. And they travel to their teachers. In an effort to restrict the movement at school, the year levels have been given a corridor of their own. So the year 10s are actually sharing a set of classrooms, there's about 18 classrooms, with the year 12s. So on the day that the year 10s are in, the year 12s are off-site. Obviously, alternately, when the year 12s are on-site, the year 10s are off-site. So coming back to Nikki's point about how is the cleaning managed. So at the moment, we've got short breaks between every period, and there will be, in the use of our rooms, we have to tease out through the timetable at the moment. But there will be regular cleaning going on during the day. So if your child is in, let's just say, class 2A, when they move off to another class, and potentially in the same corridor or not, depends if they, I've just complicated that. They may move to another classroom in the same corridor, for example, for MFL, because they're doing a different language. Cleaning team would come in, and it's a process called fogging. They're using an approved cleaner. They would fog the room. It takes, my understanding is, between 5 and 6 minutes for that to take effect, and they do that. So there will also be hand cleaning normal cleaning every night, as well as the between the period cleaning at school where possible. If there are double periods where children don't move, obviously we won't need to do the fogging. But generally what we're trying to do is every time a class is vacated, and we will try and fog that classroom. So it gives a level of cleaning. Now, to give you an idea about how complex the health and safety regime is, I was in a conversation the day before yesterday about how we're going to sanitize paper books, because obviously paper is an issue, kids are reading, etc., etc. So the reason I share that with you is just to give you a sense of the depth and breadth that people are thinking about in terms of keeping your children safe. For secondary children, we're thinking is that we'll minimise the number of paper books that they use, and they will stay at school. And then their device will come with them to school every day, and obviously that's their personal device. No one should be touching that. So from a health and safety perspective, that's as good as it gets. They still need to bring their own pencils and pens. They need to bring their own water and food for a day, and that should see them through. So no one should be sharing that, those resources. Every classroom that we've got is set up to be socially distanced according to the regulations from the KHDA. So they'll be 1.5 metres apart. The students will not move the desks. They will go in, they'll sit at the same desk every time they go into that room. So that's, again, that will be, in those rooms, again, every time they're vacated, our hope is that they will be fogged and cleaned. So health and safety wise, restricting them to a corridor, 18 classrooms. Also, for the first 2 weeks, we've decided that all classes will be delivered in that home corridor. So in normal circumstances, whilst most of the classes can occur in that corridor, sometimes they would need to travel to a laboratory for science, practical. They might need to go to DT for practical foods, etc. What we want to do is that for the first 2 weeks, all of their classes will be delivered in their home corridor, regardless of what subject it is. We just need to get our kids in, make sure that they're safe and calm and clear about the instructions. Once we've got that after 2 weeks, we hope, if it takes longer, we'll take longer. But once we've got that safe, then we intend for students to be able to travel to things like science and DT. PE will probably still happen in the first 2 weeks. We can't see a solution to that. If we can, then we'll keep them in for PE as well. So those first 2 weeks are slightly different, and then they will be able to travel. PE, on PE days, where they have PE, they can come to school in their PE gear and remain in their PE gear all day and travel home. Exit and entry. Matt, can I ask you to describe entry and exit for year 10, and then I'll get Helen to describe entry and exit for year 11. That'll just stop me from talking.
Okay, so I believe there's a video sent out recently regarding year 10 entry into school. So they will be entering, for them, normality is they're going to be walking through the main gate as they normally would into school. But then the entry into the physical part of the building is going to be between phase 3 and 4. They will enter on the ground floor. That is where the thermal scanner is. And as they're walking through there, there'll be a member of senior leadership and other staff they're supporting and observing observing students going through. And then they will immediately turn right and go upstairs. So they will be isolated in the sense that as one year group, they'll be entering school, going up to the first floor, which is actually the English corridor, and then they're going to be assigned a classroom that will be their homeroom. So they're not going to have any interaction with any other year group during that entry point. The same way then when we exit, or when they exit, the human traffic, as I'm calling it, will be in one direction. We're talking about keeping students, we're going to be very kind of strict on this. Students will have to walk on the right-hand side of the corridor. So that human traffic and the human flow of traffic will be quite natural, or as natural as it can be in this case. But again, with regards to social distancing within the corridors, there's clearly marked 2-meter gaps all the way down the corridors. On every single corridor during entry, exit, and lesson time, and any kind of lesson changeover, there's going to be an assistant principal and a head of house supporting students and staff. So we are trying to minimize contact and trying to minimize any kind of non-social distancing as much as possible.
Yeah.
Did you talk bathrooms in there?
Sorry, I didn't include bathrooms. One or two people actually mentioned bathrooms there. So the year 10 bathroom is actually on their corridor as well. So no other year groups during the time that they're in will be using that bathroom. So again, it's essentially, we've created a year 10 bubble within that floor, as soon as they enter the physical part of the building, they're essentially within a year 10 bubble.
And just before I let Helen take over about the year 11s, so the bathrooms will be cleaned after every use, every hour, whichever comes first. So again, just trying to keep that as clean and sanitised as possible. Thanks, Helen.
Yeah, so for year 11, they're going to be coming up from preferably the gate at the far end, but that's yet to go out. And then they'll come up round the back of the building, in through the canteen, the door closest to the BLP. Then they'll go through the canteen, turn to the right, that's where the thermal scanner is that they'll pass. Then they'll carry on through the BLP, all the way to the end of the BLP. Then their designated staircase, so they're the only year group using that staircase, is that one at the end. They'll use that to get up to floor 2, which is their bubble corridor. No other year groups on that corridor. They'll then turn right across to phase 4, and that's where all of the lessons will take place there. And the toilets are going to be the ones closest to reception, so the left end of the corridor.
Thanks, Helen. I just pick up a few things that are relevant that I've seen. Masks and gloves. Yes, your children will need to be in masks every day. Gloves are not mandatory, but if it makes you feel more comfortable if your children are wearing gloves, then of course that's completely up to you. The buses are tricky, and the question came yesterday also. So the buses are mixed year level. So it is contrary to the year level bubbles that we've got, but it's an unavoidable situation. So my only certainty that I can give you about the buses is that, as I said yesterday, your responsibility is first and foremost that if your child is not feeling well or is running a slight temperature, that they should not get on the bus. Before they get on the bus, they will be scanned with a handheld thermometer, and if they are over 37.5 degrees, my understanding is they will not be allowed on the bus. Once they get on the bus, they'll be socially distanced, so STS have reduced the capacity of the buses to fit in with the guidelines. And so once they get on the bus, they'll be given a designated seat, they'll be wearing their mask, and obviously they'll be sitting relatively isolated from each other. They'll travel into school. Now, for secondary students, on a normal day, they're now being dropped off behind primary. They will then walk over as they would normally, and then if they were year 10 or 11, they would use the entry instructions that you've just got from Matt and Helen. And at the end of the day, they would track back out the building over to the bus and pick up the bus as normal. So clearly the floor is the mixed year level buses. It's an unavoidable situation as I understand. So the responsibility sits with parents first and foremost, the bus drivers to do the scanning, and then for our parents to support the bus drivers if their child is over 37.5 degrees and obviously take them home or however that works. So that's the buses. Elena, you mentioned about tutor time and resonance and dazzle. So your children still have a tutor. Now, what you're used to up to year 10, I think, is that your tutor groups are a vertical. So by vertical, I mean that they have some year 7s, some year 8s, some year 9s, and some year 10s. We've needed to disband the vertical house system, vertical tutor system, and go horizontal. So that means that all tutor groups are all of the same year level. That allows us to have them housed in the same area. That allows us to get information efficiently to them. That allows us to house them in their home corridors and deliver the lessons as efficiently and safely as we can. The flip side of that though, Elena, of course, is as you raise, resonance and dazzle are not horizontal, they are vertical. So like everything that's cross-level, we have put a hold on that to start with. So the Performing Arts tutor groups and the Sports Development Academy, which are also vertical, they have been disbanded and put into their year levels to start with. Now, I know that Performing Arts are working on a plan whereby they will still engage with those students, but it will be in single year level programs as opposed to a vertical year level program. So Elena, does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, and then I'll just do 2 more things before I go back to the questions that are coming. Siblings. So if you have children in primary or you have multiple children in secondary, and if your children are in year levels that don't match up, so for example, you might be looking and going, well, hang on, I've got a child in year 7 and I've got a child in year 10. And it could be that I'm taking one into school one day, leaving one at home, taking another school into another day, blah, blah. It could be that our commitment is to try and match up the siblings with each other. So, for example, if you had a child in year 7 and year 10, as I've just described, we would make an exception for you to have your children at school on the same day. But what it does mean is that if it's their normal day, obviously they would just come in and do their classes normally. If we house your child on a day where their year level is not at school, we will have classrooms set aside where they will just access their learning remotely. So what we're hoping is that's a bit of a compromise for parents for whom bringing all of their children to school on the same day is what they want, so we can meet that need. But actually on certain days, they'll still be accessing their learning remotely because the rest of the year level may be at home and they'll be receiving it remotely anyway. That's the compromise. So that's the first thing I wanted to say to you. We need to look at siblings again, and that's another layer of complexity. Now, for the 100% remote learning, so for those of you who are sitting in the audience at the moment that have chosen 100% remote learning, your experience is actually what you had at the end of last year. So I'm picking that most of you who've chosen that option were satisfied with what you got last year and or you've got some serious health and safety concerns. Now, those might be because you just want to see how school's going to run, and Andy can talk about it all he likes, but actually I'd still quite like to see how it runs. I get that. So there's that option. So there was a question there before, will there be live lessons for my children who are at home? Everything will be live for our students. So like the remote learning period, so that class of year 10 maths, year 10 English that I talked about before with Matt, if your child is in year 10 and has Matt as their English teacher, they will access Matt's class and his teaching at exactly the same time as the rest of the class. And that's what I mean is, I know it's a slightly different experience, but they're still getting the same Matt on that day. All right, so hopefully that clears that up. The other thing that we have to do is all lessons are videoed now. So entire lessons are recorded, and therefore, if we've got children who are accessing learning in different time zones, they can still access the same lessons. If, for example, your child's not feeling well when English is on, he or she can come back to that lesson and watch that later in the day. If you're sick, if you actually intended to be at school but you are sick, you can still watch the lesson at a later date. So the recording of those lessons is an enormous advantage because the material will still be there and the tasks will still be there. Again, another advantage for using Teams, carrying on with that. Okay, so other questions? Anything else surfacing, Matt or Helen, or anything from the floor? Matt, has you got anything that stands out?
There's one here about sport activities. I'm not sure, but my connection's a little bit insecure at the minute. Have you mentioned sport, Andy?
No, I haven't. It's
one about sport and swimming.
Yeah, okay. So there is definitely no swimming happening at school. That is absolutely for certain. There is no changing facility at school. That's why the students on their PE days come into school dressed in their PE gear and go home in their PE gear. My understanding is that there is no inter-school sport, so because there's just too much mixing. So therefore, there are no school sports teams being organised at the moment. There will be some sport organised. For example, I know that I'm pretty sure that Jess Cronin our kids are entered into an elite netball competition, which is with adults. That is happening. Now, the funny dichotomy for you is that we are not allowed to swim in our pool during the day. But at 3:30 at the end of the day, my understanding is that esports can come on site and offer a swimming program in the afternoon to mixed year levels. So that's not our call. That's just what we are and aren't allowed to do. So there was not allowed to be mixed level sporting activities in school, but external sports and activity programs are allowed to run after school. Yeah. Helen, anything else that surfaces for you?
Myself, sorry. There's quite a few questions about assessment. So as I've posted below there, we'll be continuing doing CFUs, just like throughout the remote learning period, so checking for understanding tasks to assess students within the lesson. As for summative assessment, that's something we want to get right. Our first and foremost priority is wrapping your child in support and making sure they're settled coming back into school. And we're still having discussions about how we can best serve them with summative assessment. Is that fair, Andy?
Yeah, that's fair. The one thing I'd say to you is obviously when you don't have the facility or the ability to run what's a formal exam session, then we need to find alternatives. I mean, you've seen what happened with the exam boards this year. They've made exceptions. It's been tricky. They've used teacher information, past history to basically calculate grades for students. So in some ways, what we're faced with is, in this mixed or blended model, we're faced with really understanding hopefully on a day-to-day basis and a weekly basis, where your children are with their learning. We have an expectation that our teachers will do that using those checking for understanding tasks, which are what we call formative and inform kind of the learning that happens next. The other thing that I can tell you that we definitely know from the remote learning period last year is that things can change rapidly. So in the worst possible situation, I think it's the worst possible situation, if we get cases of COVID at school, we could be the whole school 100% remote learning in a heartbeat. So that would put us back into the phase where we were at the end of last year for the last weeks. That's a potential situation. If things are stable and continue to improve, then what my hope would be that we would slowly transition children back to school, normal school, more and more and more. So that's completely the other end of the spectrum. Now, if you take those two different situations, the way that we assess children on a day-to-day basis and an ongoing basis is different. It can look different. We've got more options. So by having, let's just say, student year 10s in school 50% of the time, that gives us a wider range of assessment opportunities than when we didn't see them at all. So what we need to do is adapt our assessment, keep you informed of the progress that your children are making in every subject, and make sure that if you've got concerns that we're responding to those, either from a teacher perspective or a departmental perspective or a cohort perspective, depending on what the need is. So it's one of those things that we will get right as much as we can, but we need to be responsive to what the situation is at the time.
And just another question as well about practical examinations for practical subjects. Most of the exam boards, if not all subjects, sorry, have chopped out that aspect or have adapted their examination process and how they've graded them. So for instance, for science, the required practicals are no longer, the students don't have to do them themselves. They can watch a teacher demonstrating them, which they could do via Teams. So I've lost who actually asked that question, sorry, but yeah, I can't find it. Whoever did ask it, I think there was a couple of people actually. I wouldn't worry about that. Subject heads, subject leads at the school as well are fully on top of that, and information will come as we get into school about how we will cater for that.
I think fair to say that there will be many of you who are sitting here at the moment, year 10, start of Key Stage 4, obviously year 11 in the second year of the GCSEs in the business end, if you like. What we can tell you from the experience last year is that exam boards have been responsive and responsible and tried to be realistic about the changing circumstances, the disruption, the impact on learning, and therefore the impact on achievement. If you look at our GCSE results this year, our GCSE results are the best received results that we've had for 3 years. So they've shown a trajectory upwards in incremental steps across all subjects and across the cohort each year. So it's almost like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the people that are wrapped around the design of the specs for your children, the qualifications boards, in conjunction with the schools, will all wrap around your children in acknowledgement of this is different, and to ensure they don't want to disadvantage your kids. We don't want to disadvantage your kids, and obviously you don't want your children disadvantaged. So I think you can see when you, and if you don't have a year 11 child at the or last year, once you see the GCSE results when they come out in summary, you'll actually see that our children this year, even though they did close to half a year in remote learning, were not disadvantaged in any way. Part of that's because of the exam boards in the schools. Part of that is just because I think our staff did a really good job with the work that they were doing too. So what I want to give you is a reassurance that everyone who is wrapped around the learning for your children is working really hard to make sure that they are not disadvantaged in any way. Okay, is there anything, we've probably got about another 5 or 7 minutes, I think. Is there anything burning from the floor, given that most of the questions online are being answered by Matt and Helen? Is there anything from the floor that people want to raise at the moment?
Can I just ask a quick question? Can I just ask about children? Are there going to be any staggered start and finish times, or are all the students going to be going in at the same time and leaving at the same time?
Yeah, good question, Nikki. Thank you. We looked at staggered start times. So there's a couple of things that we needed to manage. We needed to kind of think of parents dropping off, start and staggered times, and making that manageable. By having not every year level into the school every day, it sort of has reduced the traffic that we've got through school. And you'll know that we're not at capacity either at the moment. So we think that we've got entry and exit routes for year levels that are safe and efficient, that allow us to start at 7:40 every day with tutor time and allow us to finish at 3:20. So again, it comes back to that full program, bearing in mind the health and safety requirements, but still being able to manage all that. So no, I mean, at the moment, if you look at what happens at school, our students start arriving from, I would say, 7:15 right through to just before what used to be 7:45. If they continue to do the same, our systems will cope with that flow.
Okay, so they will be able to do that, because say for me, for example, I would normally drop my children at 7:15 and be out of the kind of whole drama of all the busy traffic and the chaos, and they would actually normally be very quietly walking in together. So they will be allowed to do that and go into where they need to be.
Yes, so they
within that time frame.
If you drop them off at 7:15, they'll come in through the channels that are appropriate for them. They'll head towards their home tutor room, and they'll spend their time in there until school starts at 7:40.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki. Any other questions from the floor? Oh.
I have a query, please. Ms. Andy, hi, it's me again, Sabina.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, thank you. My query is with regards to PE.
Yes.
When they had the remote learning in the last academic year, the children were given a kind of routine to do, which they would do over the week and submit a recorded video. How would that work if there are students in class?
Yeah, so good question, Sabine. So what we're doing at the moment, when our heads of departments come back next week, we're sitting down with them and kind of going, okay, this is the learning model, and then we're leaving it with departments to design the program. It's exactly what happened in the remote learning period. So for example, you've seen it with PE. When we went into remote learning last time, once PE found out that we were all off-site or whatever, they designed their program with a few key principles in mind. One was regular activity, one was accessible to people, etc., etc. They will be doing exactly the same thing when they know that there are children on-site and off-site. So you know, there are health and safety concerns with PE and sport. They'll need to be mindful of those. They'll know that they've got some children at home and some. Now, it might be what's happening, Sabine, is that if your child is at school on a day where they've got PE, they might be doing a particular activity. They may need to set a standalone activity for the kids at home to do. So there will be something like, there will be provision of that subject in that block. But for PE in particular, probably harder than most subjects, they may have to set an alternate task based on the same principles, but an alternative task. The parallel that I would draw to that would be foods, because my daughter does foods, and what she experienced in the remote learning period was exactly the same as what kids will do here. So when, for example, Kimberly Law is delivering a foods lesson here and she'll be cooking something, my daughter was cooking it at home in our kitchen. That can actually happen. You can see how that can happen. PE have got a different dynamic. They've got a different set of challenges to face. They will work that out.
So would the children be in class when they have PE? Or would they go out somewhere to carry out their activity?
Maybe for the first 2 weeks they might be in class, because that's that home corridor thing that we tried to do. And then of course we've got the added complexity of the weather for the first month or 6 weeks, where my understanding is if it's over 40 degrees, children aren't allowed outside. So then they'll have to use their indoor spaces where best they can. We might have to repurpose some of our indoor spaces, and they'll need to adapt their program. So there are some significant challenges for them. But for example, we've got double classrooms where we've got table tennis tables available, we've got dance rooms, we've got the sports hall, and we've got some other spaces which may be not normally used for physical activity, but will still fit within the health and safety guidelines for children to be active. I think what I'd like to see is that children are active, not just in their PE classes, but on a regular basis throughout this kind of blended learning program. Because for me, that physical activity regular is just important for keeping things fresh and refreshed, really.
It is. Thank you. My concern was just that if my son does his activities at home, what about the kids in class, in PE class at that time? What would they be doing? Would they still be in class, or would they go to another room to do their PE? That was my question, really. Yeah, but so thank you. I think that's something that the school would figure out along the way. So that's fine. Thanks. Thank you.
Anything else from the floor? Okay. just want to go back to the entry exit because I'm not sure that I've covered this. So just to let you know how this works, for those of you who didn't hear it yesterday, there are 2 thermal cameras at school. So it's the same thermal cameras that you will have experienced walking into malls or shops. One is placed in phase 4, one is placed in the canteen. So whichever route your children are being brought into school, they will pass a thermal camera. Nothing special needs to happen. You know that when you walk into a mall, you don't stop and stand and stare at it for 30 seconds. You just keep walking normally. The thermal camera deals with, my understanding is, deals with about 30, can deal with 30 people per second. They will be manned by 2 or 3 staff. So if your child walks through the thermal camera space and they are scanned hot, i.e. more than 37.5 degrees, we will take them to an area just right next door to the thermal camera, which we're calling just a cool down area. Now, you know that in the current climate, that if your child is outside walking to school or even coming from the bus on the far side of primary and walking over to the side, it's quite feasible that their temperature could be raised to a place that is hotter than the camera's like. Now, the thermal cameras are more accurate than the handhelds. Okay, so they shouldn't be fooled by someone sweating because they've been walking outside for 5 minutes. However, we know that that could happen. So they would go into the cool down area, there will be water there, they can just cool down for a few minutes and then they'll be scanned again. If they are scanned again at a temperature that is risky, i.e. higher than 37.5 degrees, there is a high chance then that they'll be taken to the medical room, they'll be escorted to the medical room and then sat down there. I think they'll be allowed to cool down again a wee bit more, but if the temperature is still high, then we will call you and you will have 30 minutes to come in and uplift them from school. Now, this is not a threat, this is just process. So if after 30 minutes we can't contact you, our directive is that we need to call an ambulance for your child. They will be escorted home by a member of our staff in a full health and safety kit. But the cost of that, whatever that is, and I've heard anything from between 300 and 700 dirhams, will be passed on to parents. Now, I feel awkward saying that because it's not a threat. I just need to let you know that that's the process. So on those days for school, it might be obviously that you keep your phone handy or whatever. Hopefully you won't get a call, but that's the process for us. The reason for that is that the size of the medical rooms and the size of the isolation rooms that we set up cannot cope with large numbers of students being hot. So we can't hold people in there for hours and hours. So we need to be moving people through the system, and that's the most efficient way that we've done it. And so that's what's happening, thermal camera wise. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else from the floor urgent? Otherwise, we might draw this to a close.
Sorry, there's a question here. Sorry if I've missed this. Will the students who are opting for school, will they require a COVID test negative report to be submitted?
Good
and
question.
am I right in... Go on, sorry.
Yeah, good question. So we're waiting for directive. Our staff have just been told of the requirements for them to be back on site. So it's a declaration, COVID-free, not in contact with anyone who they know to have had COVID in the last X number of days, etc. We are waiting on a directive for what this means for parents and students. So one of the difficult things for us in this period is that the information is coming almost daily. Not necessarily changing, but just coming, decisions being made. We will pass on that information as concisely and efficiently as we can. So what I want to finish on in relation to that is what you can expect from us soon is a one-pager. What we're hoping to do is produce a one-pager which has got, for year 10 students or year 11 students, there will be a one page of information that's relevant to the learning program. Our hope is that it will have a map on it that shows the entry and exits, etc. So you'll be able to refer to that and understand what learning looks like for your children on any given day. For the people who've opted for 100% remote, we will be in contact with you probably by email next week, just to confirm that that's still what you want. Because what we've noticed is that even after yesterday, after the session with year 8 and 9, 2 families emailed and said, I'm happy for my children to start school. So if that's the case, and it doesn't have to be, if that's the case, then obviously you just need to let us know. We also know that some people will choose to go 100% remote learning after these sessions also. Again, we're completely in your hands. We can cope with whether your children are here or whether they're at home equally well. So I'll draw it to a close. Again, thanks.
Can I just interrupt? I'm sorry. Adding to Matt's question, I just wanted to check, in case if my child is remote learning and they want to join school, would they have to do the COVID-19 test and wait for the results and then join? How would that work out?
Good question, Sabine. I don't know the answer to that. I'll find out for you.
All right,
Yep.
great. Because my children are going to do remote learning. So if I want to send them back to school, would I have to send them through a test and then send them back?
I would imagine that once we know the requirements for students to be back at school, like on September the 2nd, it will be the same. But I'll confirm that with you.
All right, great. Thank you.
In that sense.
Thank you.
So look, we really appreciate your patience with this. This is an enormous exercise, as you can understand. Staff and our site team are working around the clock to make sure that they're doing everything that they can to get this right. So for want of trying, everything will be as smooth as it can be. What it means is that we're needing to drip feed you information. So you got the letter from me August the 11th. You got the video from the APs yesterday. We've had this Zoom session. What's coming next is a one-pager, and then there are some invites to meet the tutor. So you will get, hopefully today, you'll get an email which has got your child's house and tutor group on there, and there will be an invite to join a Zoom session early September to meet the tutor. Because we've gone horizontal with tutor groups, chances are that some of your children will have a different tutor from what they're used to. So I'll finish there because I've got to go to 12 and 13 1. Thanks again for your time and your patience. Keep sending us information and your thoughts. They're important to us and they help us shape what we're doing. So yeah, I appreciate your time. Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Matt. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.